Okay, who is William Shakespeare? So in your notebook, I want you to add a new page titled Who is Shakespeare? And make sure you add it to your table of contents. Divide this page into 4. Label each quarter, starting with the upper left, Shakespeare's life, then go upper right, Shakespeare's works, lower right, Shakespeare's wealth, and then lower right, Shakespeare's remains. We're going to have the pages subdivided into these categories for you. And you're going to look for the most specific facts about each category. Make sure you get this signed off when you are done. So here's some specific outcomes. You should be able to identify Shakespeare's early life, including where he was born, his wife, and education, facts about what the lost years were, where his plays were performed, why London was such a big deal, how many plays and how many categories were his plays organized into, how many sonnets and why he wrote them, what made his use of language so special, what behavior made him wealthy, what did he do, and how do you think his neighbors looked at him for this? And how many visuals remain of Shakespeare? What makes their originality questionable? And what is one strange fact surrounding Shakespeare's second best bed? So, some background for you. Shakespeare was born in a town northwest of London called Stratford upon Avon. That means literally Stratford on the Avon River. He was born around April 23rd, 1564. We know that he attended the primary school, which is like our elementary school, at King Edward VI Grammar School in Stratford. There are no records existing of his attending university. They may have been lost, destroyed, or never existed. His parents were middle class. John was a glover. That's where he made the money, which actually meant he made gloves out of leather. Will was one of 5 children who lived to be an adult. 3 of them died. 3 of the 8 total died in childbirth. So we don't have much about Shakespeare's early life because obviously when you're a child nothing really matters. But we do know, because there are records, that in 1582, at the age of 18, he married a local girl by the name of Anne Hathaway. And you can see there's a sketch of what she may have looked like then. She was 26. This is not totally shocking, except she's substantially older, almost considered middle-aged. But she was pregnant, 3 months pregnant, with their first child, Susanna. They had twins a few years later, Hamnet and Judith. Unfortunately, Hamnet died of plague in 1596. So, 1585 to 1592, there are actually no records anywhere of Shakespeare. Nothing in court cases, newspapers, even in people's journals that have been found by historians. And for this reason, these are called his lost years. We know that he shows up in London in 1592, and he is in the theater by this point. So historians assume he shows up right around 1586, 1587. And there are rumors, no proof, that he left Stratford because he got in trouble with the law. And you can see what happened there. But again, we don't know because there's no definitive evidence. So we know that Shakespeare is in London. And why does he go there? He goes there because London is the place to be in actually all of Europe. It's the place of international trade and shipping. It's the seat of government and religion, and where theater and performance were sought by customers and money. So we know he was there by 1592 because he's writing and producing plays. Initially, his little acting company is called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and they perform in the Blackfriars Theatre. They do pretty well. And by 1592, they moved their performance to the New Globe Theatre on the southern side of the Thames. And in 1603, the company renamed itself the King's Men because King James I was their patron, and he was paying their bills. So in return, they renamed themselves. That's pretty normal for patrons. So Shakespeare's plays there's a lot of them. He was very busy writing. In fact, we know he wrote 37 plays in 23 years, thereabouts. Historians think he wrote another one, but it's kind of hard to prove. His plays are broken into 3 categories: comedies, tragedies, and histories. Identifying what makes a comedy is pretty straightforward because a comedy usually ends with a wedding and there's a fool character, meaning he makes a fool out of himself. Tragedies usually end with the main character being killed or committing suicide, and histories are based on real events, which usually follow about a king's reign, such as King Henry VI. And check out this link. There's a nice link here, and we want you to figure out what's one thing you notice about his works. So Shakespeare wasn't only a playwright, he was actually a poet, and that's where he gets his name, the Bard of Stratford. Being a poet was much more socially respectable than being a playwright. Playwrights were kind of scandalous. And he wrote a specific type of poetry, sonnets. And a Shakespearean sonnet has 14 lines of poetry, 12 of which are alternating rhymes. So one line has one rhyme, one line has another, and that's what it goes for. And then his last two lines are a couplet, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Now we know he wrote them sometime between 93 and 01, but they weren't published till 1609. Think about that. He probably wrote it for a noble who paid him just for those, and somehow they got published. Now 1609 is closer to his retirement, but historians think he wrote them when he was really in need of money because the theater was closed down because of plague. But again, we don't know for sure. So Shakespeare's works, all 37 of them, are actually put into a folio, and it's called the First Folio because it's the first printing of his works. And a folio is a book, like what you see on the page, divided in quarters. And the big thing here is that they don't show up until 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's dead. So Shakespeare's not getting any money for this. In fact, these are his so-called friends who did this. And we have examples of these all around, especially in big museums. The British Museum has a couple. The largest collection are in Washington, D.C. at the Folger Shakespeare Museum, and I believe they have like 20 of them. I'll look that up. But these are actually from 1623, so they're very delicate. And again, Shakespeare didn't get a dime, and neither did his family, because there was no copyright law back then. And in fact, this picture, we don't even know if that was him, because that happened. That is the Droeshoot picture, and that came after he was dead. So Shakespeare is known today as a wordsmith, meaning he created a lot of words. And as we said, he's called the Bard of Stratford. Bard is a great writer. So Shakespeare himself is credited by the Oxford English Dictionary with the introduction of nearly 3,000 words into the English language. That's crazy. Okay, that's a lot. His vocabulary, through his works, showed upwards of 17,000 words. That's 4 times what normal, well-educated people like myself use. That's a lot. Okay, and this guy didn't go to college. So Shakespeare wasn't poor. That's one of the things that school children tend to get wrong. They think he's poor because he was acting in his plays. He wasn't like really rich either. He was in the middle, but he was pretty good for his local town. He was the most famous writer of his age, and because of this, he was able to amass some property. He was part owner, meaning a shareholder, in the Globe Theatre. He also owned a lot of property around his hometown of Stratford. He did have some prestige, but that doesn't mean a lot of money. And that prestige helped get his family a royal coat of arms. That's a big deal. Okay, so he was not poor. He had prestige, he had some money, and in fact, the home you see on the right, this was the home that Shakespeare was raised in. So his parents weren't poor either. Okay, and he did live in that one before he made it big and bought more property. But take a look at this article here. Shakespeare was a difficult man of business, and he caused some problems. So that might be helpful for you to get a better insight into what kind of man he was. So there are a few remaining visuals that date back to around when Shakespeare lived. Unfortunately, none of them actually go to before. We have the one on the left, the Chandos portrait, and that's named after the family who found it. It's the most famous, and that may show Shakespeare, but we don't know because it was done between 1610 and 1600. So pretty good chance he was alive, but we're not sure. Okay, the Cobb portrait we see here was around 1610. Again, if Shakespeare were an old man, this is not what he would have looked like. Okay, and then the Droeshoot, which is an engraving. This is actually on the First Folio from what they can think. They don't know if this is based off of this. I mean, you look at the collars, you can kind of see a little bit of change, but look at the clothing. This is way more decorative, and this style too, than this. This is much more bohemian or kind of hippie-ish. In fact, he has an earring in this one, which is realistic. But we don't have many more. There's one other, which is his funerary statue. But again, they weren't made when he was alive. So the last thing we're going to look at today is Shakespeare's will and testament. Shakespeare wrote his last will during his retirement. He left a variety of things to many different people. open this link and skim it. Okay, or you can use Control F to search who Shakespeare left his second best bed, and you can use some of this phrasing. Once you find that, skim over this article, maybe the first 8 paragraphs, and find out what the second best bed, what that actually means, because you might find that to be a little interesting. Okay, have fun.